General Alexander is a retired four-star general with a 40-year military career, culminating in the role of the Director of the National Security Agency and Chief of the Central Security Service from 2005 to 2014. In addition, Congress appointed him as the first commander to head the United States Cyber Command. Holding this role from 2010 to 2014, he established and defined how our nation is protected against cyber attacks. At IronNet, where he is co-founder and co-chief executive officer, General Alexander provides strategic vision to corporate leaders on cybersecurity issues through the development of cutting-edge technology, consulting, education, and training. He is reinventing how industries mitigate cybersecurity threats with Iron Defense, a patented solution designed to detect and alert on anomalous enterprise network behaviors through fine-tuned analytics. His goal is to bridge communication systems between the private and government sectors to create the next level of intelligence sharing and protect the nation against cyber threats on a global stage. General Alexander, this stage is all yours, sir.
Thank you, Rob. And it's an honor to be here. Back in North Carolina, so to speak. I had a few tours in Fayetteville, back as a company commander and as a brigade commander of an airborne brigade. So a lot of great time in North Carolina, and perhaps more importantly, we now have one of our major offices in the Raleigh-Durham area. So thanks. It's an honor to be here. You gave my speech. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks for that introduction. I do have a sense of humor. And as Rob said, please send questions into chat and we'll pick up on those questions right after a few minutes of discussion about what I see coming at us as a nation. And it's cyber. It's interesting. You know, we live in exponential times. What do I mean by that? It's really fascinating to see the rapid growth that we have in cyber itself and the technology around it. The amount of data that we see every year that our people are handling, that our security ops centers are handling, it's doubling every year. The number of different applications, the protocols, the devices, it's doubling. And 5G is going to add to that. So think about how the cyber world is changing and evolving. Our wealth, our ideas, our ability to operate in COVID now is because of this great capability. And it's a huge opportunity. We'll use this capability to solve things like cancer, and we'll get ahead in many areas. So it's tremendous opportunities. As Rob said, there's tremendous vulnerabilities, and we're seeing that as well. I want to focus on that a little bit and talk candidly with all of you about what I see coming our way. First, with China. If you think about what Xi Jinping said on 2 July in their 100-year anniversary speech, he talked about bashing heads and bloodshed, focused at the U.S. It was perhaps one of the most antagonistic, forthright communications back to the United States, saying, Taiwan is ours, the South China Sea is ours, and we're going to make that a red line as a country, and you need to back off. Now, that's an issue. So what do we do about that? Oh, and as part of that, leading into it, the Hafnium attacks going against Microsoft earlier this year. They got an exploit into over 30,000 companies. Part of that is, in my opinion, to steal intellectual property, what I consider the greatest transfer of wealth in history. But that doesn't account for what's coming our way. There are a lot of people who see the tensions between the United States and China rising. Hopefully this will never get to warfare, but I believe it will get to cyber engagements. And in cyber engagements, it's a big change for us as a country, because in the military engagements, we think about these two oceans that separate and protect us from the physical threats that we face. In cyber, there is no protection. We're all bound together in the same network. And China and others can go after different parts of critical infrastructure. They can go after our governments. They can go after our bank account. They can do all sorts of things to impact our lives. And when you look at the impact of the Colonial Pipeline from ransomware, imagine that orders of magnitude when a nation state wants to make an example about their displeasure with what we're doing in the South China Sea or what we're doing with Taiwan. That will significantly change this landscape. And we're on a collision course for that. Parts of that is they're stealing the intellectual property, that greatest transfer of wealth in history. That's not going to slow down. So we got to go fix that. If you turn to Russia, Russia is opportunistic in this way. They've got two major things that they're going to do. They're going after and trying to impact elections. You saw that in 2018, you saw that in 2020, and we'll see that again in 22 and 24. They're going to go after elections, and we're going to push back on that. They see cyber as a way of gaining insights and intelligence on what we're doing so that they can maneuver on the public stage about where Russia goes, what they do. But they also support their hackers, their cyber analysts, by allowing them to do ransomware-like attacks. And the closest nexus for this is between Russia and those who worked in the Russian government as hackers, as cyber hackers. And in fact, if you think back to 2017, when Russia attacked Ukraine with the NotPetya attack, wiping out the tax office there, that also collateral damage hit Maersk, it hit Merck, it hit FedEx, it hit a number of big companies, tens of billions of dollars in damage. Those specific GRU people that did that were also indicted last fall by the FBI. And you can now see what China's trying to do with things like SolarWinds is understanding how much are we doing us? What are we going to go on this? And as they do that, they see these big vulnerabilities that we have as a nation, the interdependencies we have with our supply chain, what they could do with it, and the impact that could have. Imagine if SolarWinds had been a destructive attack with a wiper virus that destroyed the data on 18,000 companies. What would that do to our country? What would that do to the stock market? What would that do globally? And with that, I believe it will pass the red line for war. Now you have Iran. Iran is using cyber daily against the Gulf states. Think Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates. They're hitting them, Jordan, Israel. They're hitting them with cyber attacks, destructive cyber attacks. They're out there practicing what they've done in the past. If you think about Iran against us, what Iran has done in 2012, they hit our nation in response to sanctions that we put on them in the energy and the finance sector. They hit Saudi Aramco with destructive attacks, destroyed the data on over 25,000 systems. Then they turned and they hit our financial system with disruptive attacks. Over 300 over an 8-month period. What if those were now wiper virus and destructive? That would crash our financial system. So we have some big problems that we face. Rob brought out some good points as we started out. We have other problems as we look at this. It's clear from my perspective that our nation is at risk in this area because we can't defend it today. When I ran Cyber Command, I was responsible for defending the nation, and I told the Secretary and the President, we can't do that because you can't see the attacks on the nation. So I want to spend a few minutes on that. What does that mean? We can't defend. How do we do that? And you can see this is part of the executive order, public-private sharing. How do we build a radar picture for cyber such that we can see events in the private sector, and the private sector can share those at network speed with the government, and we can do something about it? There's a set of things that we have to do to make that happen. First and foremost, we have to have a way of detecting events that go beyond signature-based systems. So today, signature-based are good. Don't get me wrong. We need signature-based because they remove threats. Think of those as a filter. Take out what you know. But what's getting you is what you don't know, or when you make a mistake, or when you get phished. So we need something that can see those things that go beyond a signature-based system. We'll call that behaviors. And we need a way to take those events for a company, anonymize them, and share it up in the cloud. And then do that with other companies. I'll give you a great case in point. Think about 90 banks out there today, all mid-size, all working by themselves to defend themselves. As we started this out, those 90 banks, each with 10 people, say, working on their security ops center, next year they'll have twice as much data, twice as many devices. They will not be able to keep up. So they're falling behind. It's harder and harder. They can't hire enough people. And down the road's another bank doing the same thing. Those 90 banks. Now let's turn this a little bit. What if we change the paradigm? We said, let's have those 90 banks work together, share anonymized information. We now have 900 people working together collectively to defend. We can not only share knowledge, we can pass that information back and forth, and we can create a radar picture for what's going on between our 90 banks and share that anonymous information with the government so they can see what's hitting the 90 banks without knowing which one. We build that radar picture, and all of a sudden, the government can see attacks on our country. So we, the private sector, we, the states, need to work together to help make this happen. We've got to create that picture, because without that picture, we're all fighting by ourselves. And everything that we get is after the fact, an incident response. We have to change that around. We have to bring that together and change this paradigm so that as we go into the future, we're now thinking about how do we work together? What can we pass back to the government? What can the government do? What's the roles and responsibilities? DHS. What's the state role? How does the state see what's going on? So what can Rob see that when a crisis hits, he's prepared to help the governor and the state respond in a way that says, I can get the state critical infrastructure. We've got that. We've got people working on the energy. We've got the comms infrastructure working, right? Healthcare working. We can do that. And the government's up and running. How did we do that? How did we work together? That's what we've got to practice. You know, one of I think the greatest thing from my perspective was serving in the military. I learned a lot. One of the things I learned was the value of training and working together. And I came into the military. I hate to admit being that old, so I'll maybe lie a little bit about my age. But when you think about it, I was in the military in the 70s and 80s. And we had to rebuild our military and train that military to work together. And we did that by taking them out to the National Training Center. And one of those training centers, one for the heavy force, one for the light force. And we trained them to failure. It was tough. We'd go back, these brigades and battalions they'd say, we're the best in the world. And the world-class op force would come up against them and wipe them out in 15 minutes. They go, whoa, we weren't ready for that. Okay, so let's try that again. And they do that over a 14-day period 7 times. And what they quickly learn is how to go after and fight in this space. That was the army we took to Iraq in 1990. That was the world's best army, period. And it was the best because we trained it together. We need to do that in cyber now between our government and our private sector, because all of us in the private sector, we're part of the infrastructure that's being attacked. We're part of the defense. We can't counterattack. We can defend. But today, if we defend by ourselves, we will surely lose. So we have to come together. This public-private sharing is the key to the future. And it has to actually have in it the training scenarios so that we can practice ransomware. Let's think about ransomware. How do we get out in front of it? Today, people who are doing ransomware just scan out there and see, they don't see what's going on. Oh, he forgot to do something. He's got those campaigns. Nobody sees them. Nobody can put it together until after the fact. Then somebody gets ransomed, they pay or they don't pay, and we've got a problem. Biggest issue for state governments today, biggest issue for schools, biggest issue for healthcare, ransomware. And who's doing that? Well, think Russia, think some of our adversaries allowing people to do it. China involved in parts of that, North Korea. And so if we work together, imagine the ability to turn this whole paradigm around and say, when you try to get into us, we're going to do two things. We're going to block you. We're going to work together. And our government's going to come back. We're going to find you and we're going to hold you accountable. Let's turn the tables. If you want to turn the tables, we got to work together. We got to build that radar system. We've got to share it. And then we've got to train. And, you know, one of the things I think our country's really good at is just that. We're really good at training and learning and teaching and growing. You know, I had the opportunity in a lot of my discussions say, you know, it's with great pride, we should highlight that we're the ones that discovered and built the internet. We ought to be the first to secure it. And that's what this is all about. So with that, Rob, let's open it up for questions.
Sounds great. And General Alexander, there is so much to unpack from your comments. I want to first give our attendees an opportunity to post their questions. I have a few of my own that I can lead with, but I wanted to, before we get into the Q&A, I wanted to say thank you for sharing your thoughts as a fellow veteran, as somebody who served in the theater at the same time that you just in a time frame similar to just what you just referenced. You hit on several personal notes for me, so for that I say thank you. I think we have a question here from Jessica Cisco to all of the panelists, to General Alexander. How will you get buy-in from the private sector, and how do you ensure this major sharing network is not compromised?
Well, sir, first in buy-in, we are actually working this with the energy sector and with the defense industrial base today. The energy sector, the CEOs and stuff came forward to us and said, help us defend the sector, help us collectively defend. And you bring out perhaps the key point, Jessica, is that, well, if we're going to work together, how do we do this? I mean, how do I share my threat-related information with other companies? How do we expose that and share it with the government? So I'm not somebody coming back to me and saying, no, you failed to do A, B, C, or D. So what we came up with was the ability to generate events within a company so they can see what's going on in that company. And then take those events and anonymize them and put them up to the cloud. And now Southern Company just became Company X up here. Now, another energy company, Company Y, when they have events, they can now share those events in a secure cloud region that only these companies can talk to that are in. So you have to have the credentials to go into and come out of that network. And that network is an isolated network. Now, does that mean is it's foolproof? Probably not. But what it does have is threat-related and only threat-related information that automatically correlates between companies. So if you have 6 companies and 3 of them have the same event, like SolarWinds, what we saw was when SolarWinds domain name server command and control hit one company, 4 days later we saw it hit another. Those automatically correlate. So you two have the same. 11 days later, another one. Oh, you have the same thing. And you can see that, and companies block that on their command and control. So when you think about that, it is the process of taking that information, anonymizing it. And we had to work for 2 years with lawyers to get that done for the energy, the finance sector, and now with the defense industrial base. And that's the key, anonymize the information and share it. It goes another step, if I could, Jessica, and just add to that, that there's another important aspect of this. By taking that information and sharing it, we should also then walk down the road of liability protection for those who are doing all they can to protect their networks. Because it's my experience, if a nation state wants to attack you, they will get through. And the only way to stop them is by having our nation state stop them. And the only way to do that is by making it visible. And so if a company goes through all those steps and they still get hacked, then our nation should step back and say, okay, liability protection, we're going to do certain steps here. And oh, by the way, we're going to find out who did this and we're going to hold them accountable. And so I think we need to do both.
General Alexander, we have a couple more questions in chat. This next one comes from Michael Terrell, and his question is, are there areas of concern, and this is on the third-party risk management side, are there areas of concern we should look at more closely at related to hardware and software purchasing with respect to cybersecurity threats?
That's a great question, because it really gets into this recent set of over the last year and a half about Huawei. Do you trust the Chinese in putting infrastructure into your communications network that would allow them to take any communications you have and ship it back to China? And so that would hugely make their theft of intellectual property a lot easier for them. They would probably thank us for that. Now, having said that, that's a concern that falls right in there. The second part is, of course, they'd say, well, we can show you that our hardware isn't compromised in any way. The issue isn't just that. They also update the operating system upon which it operates. And modifying the operating system is really the key to stealing all the property. So this is an area of great concern. And I think that's part of the future. And so you're going to see more and more concern about what types of hardware you put into different systems. In fact, in the United Kingdom, they are backing off of all the Huawei equipment for just those reasons. They now see the threat. They said, okay, oops, that was a mistake. We need to go fix that. So I do see that as a threat. I think it's a huge problem. And you have to look at the supply chain all the way to the end. Did that chip come from a source you don't trust? And if so, I've got to come back up and say, okay, I can't do that. How do I fix that? How do we modify that? That'll be part of this whole dynamic of creating this dome.
Next question, sir, comes from Mark Schuler, and his question reads, how do we get between the bad actors and the necessity for an ever-changing, expanding information system? Is there any opportunity for offense against bad actors before cyber crimes are committed?
Yes, that's a great question, because it really highlights the future that we're going into, 5G. That's hugely changing, and it's growing, and it creates all the issues that, Mark, you bring up here. And that is the bad actors, they're going to see that as, wow, this is great. I've got all these opportunities. Look at what I can do. So the flip side of that brings back this radar picture for cyber. And when you start to think about how do you build a radar picture for cyber and how do we share that, I think that's where we start with the first part. And you bring out another point on, well, how do you get out in front of these bad actors? And today, the bad actors kind of get a free ride. Look at REvil and DarkSide, these ransomware guys. They do something in ransomware, they get outed, and they come back a week later as a new name, same tools, going down the next road. What if we didn't just out REvil, but we went after every person that was doing it, both on helping to set it up and those that were actually accomplishing it? You know, ransomware as a service has multiple players now. Get them all in there, hold them accountable. That's where the FBI, Interpol, and others arrest these guys. Make them think twice about what they're doing. Make this really hard. That's what we've got to do. And that gets to that third point that you have. How do we get out in front of them? As soon as we know who they are, then we should be watching them. It's kind of like criminals. We know they're all coming after this. It's a policing function on a national level. And we are going to have to do this. And we need to say, okay, we have to now track what you're doing and do it much better than we've ever done it before. And we know who you are, and we're going to track what you're doing. Doesn't matter, change your name, you still live in the same place.
Next question, sir, comes from Ben Coulter, who you may personally know. And it speaks to a question that I personally have for you as well. Question for Keith. We served together at a few duty stations. Do you have any recommendations for young professionals or those transitioning from the military interested in a career in cybersecurity and educational pathways that can help them break into the field?
Well, I think this is a great place for veterans, cybersecurity. And just get in as a tier one. There's a couple things that you can do to learn how to be a tier one. There's courses from SANS that you can take that get you the tier one. With tier one, that means you can now work as a security ops center analyst. And with the ability to learn, grow, and supervise and go higher, you can learn and then you can help build that. In our security ops centers, we have a number of veterans in there already, people who have served before in all different capacities. And we hire kids right out of college that don't have any security ops center, but they're really good in computers. We train them. So this is an area of huge growth. I'll tell you right now, there aren't enough people. So this is one area where you can do it. And oh, by the way, there are a lot of remote jobs here. You can do it remotely. You get all the security tools you need. You might have training centers that you come into. You can do it both remote and you can do it from a center. So this is one where I think veterans and those that have worked hard and have that discipline, that's a step up. It brings automatically, they have the discipline, companies see that and they say, okay, I can bring you in. You've got to be willing to learn. You got to put the time in. It's like training, you don't become a good tank commander or squad leader without doing all the work and learning all the things that you had in your tasks and all that. It's the same in cyber. So you put the time in, you learn, and this will take off. These are great opportunities. So thanks for that.
Thank you, sir. Question from Troy White. Would you require those companies sharing info to gap their operational network from the threat sharing network to avoid multiple companies being crippled at the same time should any one system get compromised?
Yeah, in fact, in part, that's part of what's accomplished. So you want today, Troy, when I look at the way networks work, your endpoint, your SIM, your firewall are all in the network. An adversary who's watching somebody trying to fix something can see what the administrator and the security ops center teams are doing in that network. They're visible. So when they're up, you go down. When they're down, you go up. It's like hide and seek. So you have to know when they're in there and you just watch them and then you go away. And when they're away, you come back up and you go back and forth like this. And you're very careful. And if you look at all the hacking things, you work around that. And that's step one. What we do is different. So we're not in the network. So to start right off, instead of being in the network, tap the network, but sit above it. So they can't see what you see. They can't get to you because you're a tap. So you're up here. You're looking at this network. They're in the maze. So they're in the maze. You can see in the maze, these guys are fighting in the maze. You're sitting above the maze saying, oh, that's interesting. Wonder why he's doing that. So that's part of what needs to be done. You need to change the paradigm for the attacker so you can identify them. And then you need tools to help illuminate that. And those are where behavioral analytics and other tools like that come in. And then it goes to the earlier question, and you need to train people how to go after this. So it's a combination of all those. So that's the way you keep companies from being crippled in this area.
Roger that. Just as a side note, Danny Doolin messaged me privately and said, I have 2 veterans who are currently apprentices in our cyber apprentice program. That person that asked the question about how to break into the industry, they can email Danny personally at daniel.doolin, that's DANIEL.DULIN at ncommerce.com. Daniel, can you put your email address in the chat feature for all attendees? I would greatly appreciate that. Question from Tim Atkinson. is there an outreach program geared towards financial institutions, to your knowledge, both large and small, to help protect their members as well as their organization?
Yes. And so I think the big companies, if you think of your Section 9 banks, they spend a lot of money. They're going to say, look, I got this. I'm good. Okay, good. Now go to the next step. What about the mid-sized and small banks? They don't have the people. They need the help. They have managed service. So they're the first ones to say, come in, help us do this collectively. So the outreach program, we're actually doing what with the small and mid-sized. And when you talk about mid-sized banks, some of those are pretty big banks. You know, you think, wow, that's a big bank, you know, X 10 to 70 billion. Okay, that's a pretty big bank in my book. And when you start to think about that, the issue is, but they don't have the security ops center depth and all the tools going after it because they can't afford that. So they're the ones who would most benefit from that collective defense approach. And the small banks and the mid-sized banks, imagine if you put all that together, you now have a view that is orders of magnitude bigger than what a big bank sees. And now there's a compelling reason for the entire sector to work together.
All right. Just as a matter of time hack, it is 11:38 a.m. Eastern Time. I have a couple of questions of my own, sir. There's no current questions remaining in the chat, no other rounds in the chamber. So we've spoken briefly about the deficit of cybersecurity professionals and how that deficit is only growing. If you had a child, or if you were mentoring, a high school student, what advice would you give them personally into areas of interest that can lead to a career in cybersecurity, whether it be an educational pathway or a military pathway? And why is the Air Force superior to the Army?
Wow, so much to unpack and so many things to set right and get right here. So first off, I think we need to encourage our children and our grandchildren to go through the science, technology, engineering, and math programs. We need more scientists, math, and all that. Our nation prospered in the 60s predominantly because of what we were doing in space and what all those engineers and all the spin-out from those programs was because of those engineering. We need to continue that engineering excellence. So I do have 4 daughters and 16 grandchildren. And 4 of the 4 daughters, 2 are security cyber programmers. One's an aeronautical engineer and one's a social worker. And so encouraging kids to go that route, I think is the important thing, and it's good for the country. And now with respect to the military, I do think going into the military is a great opportunity. For those who say, I'm not sure what I want to do, going into the military, there are some exciting capabilities in the military. And some of the most exciting in my mind was what we did in cyber. So going in there as a Army person, I understand the Air Force did pick up a program as well. Going into the military and any one of the services allows you now to see how cyber is being used to defend the country and to defend our nation, and what you can do both defensively and offensively. And the military has a great training program. They send people for 6 months down to Pensacola to learn the real cyber. It's an amazing course. But to get there, you've got to do these kind of things. You've got to say, okay, I've got to be up in this area. I've got to be good in these. So I would encourage students to take the math, to take the engineering, so that when you get into these courses, you understand it and you can take it. And if you haven't done that, not a problem. Get that. Go to a community college or something and get some of those courses under your belt so you do understand it. And, everybody goes, well, it's so complex. Everything is complex until you take the first step. And in cyber, it's the same thing. Take the first step, remove the fuzziness, start to understand exactly what's going on, and anybody can be in this business.
I see. I don't know if I read this incorrectly, but Charles Spies wrote "Go Army, beat Air Force." That must be a typo. So finally, Finally, General Alexander, we have about 3 minutes left. I want to close with this question. North Carolina being one of several states that have legislation pending related to the or the use of public funds to pay ransomware. What is your personal opinion based on what you have seen in various ransomware attacks as to whether or not other states should pursue similar legislation for their own areas?
Now, is the legislation to help companies build back or to pay, or what's the purpose of the legislation again?
It's the prohibition of the use of public funds in the payment of ransom
I
with
got
respect to a ransomware attack.
Yeah, I think I can understand both sides of this. So the more you pay, the more they're going to do it. So, I don't know the right answer on that, to be honest. I've heard both sides, and what if it's a critically important thing at a hospital and lives are at stake? What do you do? So I would evolve that question to, why don't we just take it off the table? Why don't we put our resources into going after ransomware and eradicating it? So how do we do that? Well, it starts with what we were just talking about. Make it visible. Find out who's doing it. There's a finite number. It's a big number, but it's a finite number. There's hundreds of groups out there. Let's go get them all. Let's hold them accountable and start taking them down. You take down 10, 15, 20 of those groups, you start putting them in prison, I'll bet you this thing drops down like crazy. So we got to do that. We've got to hold them accountable. So I think the real way to get out in front is to attribute, hold them accountable, get our government and our allies, Interpol and everybody else involved in going after these guys. Make it a priority. That's what's going to happen to actually do this. And oh, by the way, we need to do that in other areas in cyber as well. So it fits right in. We should just do it together. Then the second part is perhaps the state could help those companies that say, I'm not going to pay, and they suffer some, destructive malware on their network. What they have the opportunity to do is to now build back, and the state may be able to help. So I think there's opportunities there. So I think that's what I would do.
General Alexander, I think you really put a button on today's keynote address with all your responses to the questions that were asked and the material that you presented. I'm in awe of your career, sir. I think, with at the front end of the U.S. Cyber Command and really shaping that to be an effective organization in the DoD, incredibly impressive. I'm appreciative of your time today. And on behalf of our attendees and my agency, thank you very much for delivering this keynote. And we look forward to hearing from your counterparts tomorrow during tomorrow's opening address.
Thank you, Rob. An honor and privilege to be here.